dramatic Champions Cup weekend and another mixed weekend on the European front for the provinces. Leinster and Ulster secured bonus point wins on Saturday, but it was a different story for Munster and Connacht, who both suffered away day disappointments. All that means that there's plenty to discuss on the latest episode of the Left Wing podcast. Will Slattery here with you, and I'm delighted to be joined by Cian, Tracey, and Luke Fitzgerald to look back on all the drama from the weekend and plenty of other talking points that have been getting people's attention over the last couple of days. And Cian, we might start with Munster because I know you were at Sandy Park on Sunday. Plenty of drama, plenty of excitement. Obviously, from a Munster perspective, it was the second kind of dramatic second half collapse in a row. And as we touched on in our preview a few weeks ago, the draw on paper looked to be quite an inviting one. And maybe for Munster to get a good kind of place in their pool ahead of the knockout stage. Now they're just fighting to stay in the tournament. What do you think on Sunday went so badly wrong? They looked, with their bonus point try secured, it looked like a 5-point victory for all money. Flash forward 20 minutes or so, and they kind of lose by 8. They end up only getting 1 point coming home, and it just couldn't have gone any worse from where they were. What went wrong?
I'm smiling, Will, because I'm having flashbacks of my panic rewrite that I had to do. If only you'd seen the match report that I had written about the hour mark, showering praise on like what was like
Yeah.
an excellent Munster performance. I mean, the 4 tries that they scored were so good, and I thought another big step forward for their attack. I thought Jack Crowley was absolutely outstanding, like really good. And yeah, it's become a bit of a theme, Will. I've been writing about it in today's paper and online. I mean, Munster have been coughing up leads in 4 of their last 6 games. You think back to the game in Ulster last month, they went into an early lead. They gave that up. Same happened against Leinster. The same happened against Bayonne. The same happened last weekend. And even in the win over Glasgow that they had down in Musgrave Park, they conceded 4 second half tries. So this has been a bit of an on-running team for the last while, which is pretty concerning. I think there was a lack of leadership maybe at the weekend. I think they're badly missing Peter O'Mahony, as well as his playing ability, but also his leadership. It just goes to show, I think, how important he still is. It probably goes to show how surprised Munster were that he decided to step down as captain, because they still haven't appointed a permanent captain. Now, I think what will be really frustrating for Graham Rowntree is that when things started going wrong on 62 minutes, when Exeter scored their try that kind of got them back into the game, like Tyg Byrne was on the pitch, Diarmuid Barron was on the pitch, Jack O'Donoghue, 3 guys who you'd imagine are going to be front runners to take over from O'Mahony, more so Barron and Tyg Byrne. And also Conor Murray had come off the bench, one of the most experienced players in the country, let alone in the club. So he obviously had a tough game when he came on. So I don't think it was complacency or anything, Will. I think they just kind of lost their heads. Obviously, the bounce of a ball for Calvin Nash's try, that was an error on his part. Munster were really annoyed with Henry Slade's try at the end. The 2 retreating players being in an offside position, Matthew Reynal being in the way. But the reality is Munster should never have found themselves in a position where they were kind of, had gripes about the referee, because like you said, Will, when Shane Daly scored that try, and it was such a brilliant try as well, from how far it started, and like Antoine Frisch's break for Diarmuid Barron to make the run through the gap. It looked like Munster were going to be coming home with 5 points, and that would have been an ideal response to what was a really disappointing draw at home to a weakened Bayonne side. So all of a sudden they went from getting 5 points to losing the game, and then at the very last play they lost the losing bonus point as well, which could be absolutely crucial when it comes down to it. So what is it, 3 points from their opening 2 games is not what anyone saw coming. And I agree with you, Will. I think Munster would have looked at this pool as being one that they could have won, not just come out of, that they could have won. And we know how important it is to get a home draw, particularly when it comes to the knockout stages, in terms of finances, everything that comes with it. And now they've left themselves in a massive hole of their own making. They've got Toulon away after Christmas and Northampton at home. and they need two big results from them if they want to get through, let alone getting home advantage.
Yeah, like having watched the first 2 weekends, they should be sitting there probably with 10 points out of 10. They did enough in both games to get 2 bonus point wins. And look, it's a funny one because obviously results wise, the last 2 weekends has been another disaster. Like, drawing with the Bayonne team who had made over 10 changes and then letting that massive lead slip against an Exeter team who, are good side, but they're a rebuilding side with, losing many of the key players they had over the last number of years. And yeah, like as Key mentioned there, the rugby they were playing at the weekend was just like really, really good at times. And it's kind of light years removed to what we kind of almost suffered through for a number of years prior to that. So I'm still kind of like strangely positive about some aspects, but obviously results wise, it's been a very, very bad couple of weeks. But I still think if I take a step back from that for a second, but maybe that's not kind of treating them with maybe the standards we should be looking for because ultimately they didn't get the results. What are you kind of thinking from some of that?
I kind of hold them to a different standard this year just because of the league win last
Yeah.
year. You just want to make sure you see a little bit of progress, and they were pretty street smart, I thought, at the end of last year, as well as combining some lovely attacking play. I thought at times they were pretty street smart, and they were stingy defensively when they needed to be as well. Um, it seems to be just across the board in sports. It's so hard to play a kind of expansive game. It seems in any sport without exposing yourself defensively. I don't know what it is about sports. I've played in a few teams where I felt like maybe we were close to it, but even still, some of the really good teams I played on, you concede a try or two at the end. It seems to be the way when you're playing kind of an expansive match or you're really dominating an opponent. I don't know what it is about it, but um, I thought it was disappointing. I was so pleased watching them. I just thought they were really brave with the strategy. I thought they used that kick in behind from midfield quite like really, really effectively. But they were also brave with it at times where there was two or three extra defenders in your face and they were still grubbering it behind or little small crossfield kicks. So there was some brilliant stuff. I thought throughout the game, and I'd echo Cian's sentiment there, but I just hold them to a different standard this year. And I just can't. I just was so disappointed in just how they finished the game. I just really think they put themselves in a bit of a hole needlessly, and yeah, I mean, from looking like we were kind of tipping them a couple of weeks ago to be a real threat in this competition and to make the jump that we kind of have expected from Munster, um, that is now looking like it is in serious danger. What I would say is though they're very capable and they can draw on experiences from last year of going away to Toulon and getting the win. And they're clearly not infallible there off the back of what we saw, last week. So they can still do this. And certainly, you think Northampton is definitely achievable at home, but they've made it incredibly difficult for themselves from what should have been. They actually had a lot of the hard work done in both games. That's what's the most disappointing part about it. Like you think, okay, like Leinster got off to a shocking start on the weekend. That does make your job far more difficult. But Munster haven't had that. They've got really good starts. So it's kind of like whether it's complacency or whatever it is, sloppiness, it's hurt them. It's hurt them, and it's really made the trip back to where they should be very, very difficult.
Keen, you touched on the captaincy situation. Like it's hard to know how much that plays into it, but it certainly can't be helping the situation. Just having a bit of uncertainty around who's captaining the side, and obviously Peter Manny's been injured in any case. So even had he not passed on the baton, he wouldn't have been there either weekend. But like, what's going on there? Like, why hasn't Graham Roundtree picked someone? Because it would seem pretty obvious, as you mentioned. There's a couple of key leaders there who would just be seemingly next in line. I don't know. It's just kind of a strange situation. I find like that it's kind of been drawn out, and now obviously you were writing about it today. Like it's now become a bit of a talking point on the back of some kind of rudderlessness in the second half of two key European games.
I think Munster were taken aback, I think, is what we can take from this by Peter O'Mahony's decision. Because, I mean, Peter O'Mahony came back in his first game, was in against the Stormers after the World Cup, and he was captain. So, like, I'm not sure. I haven't heard if something has happened behind the scenes, but it seems very strange that a guy would step down as captain. Not necessarily step down as captain at this stage of his career. You can understand the logic, but to me, it was strange that he came back and did it for one game, and then all of a sudden decided not to. We haven't had the chance, obviously, like you mentioned there, when he's injured, so we haven't been able to talk to Peter O'Mahony and see kind of, what was really going on. And I suppose from Graham Roundtree's point of view, if it did come as a surprise, then I suppose he wants to take his time and find the right successor. It is obviously a massive job.
But sorry,
Diarmuid,
just to come in on that, you say like take his time to find the right successor. You listed the contenders. It's not as if it's going to be some random left field appointment. Like it shouldn't really be a straightforward thing. I would have thought.
well, I would have thought that Tyg Byrne was like a ready-made replacement there personally, but then you had Diarmuid Barron, who I would have said was a bit left field, to be honest. But obviously we're not privy to what goes on behind the scenes in terms of leadership and that. Tyg Byrne has been captain for both of the Champions Cup games. I think, he would have to take his fair share of the responsibility for, for passing up both leads in both of those games. Not that it's all on him, but I think there's a bit of a lack of leadership across the board. I agree with what Luke says. You have to hold Munster to higher standards this season, and that's what they certainly do themselves. I don't think any of this is overly critical. This is stuff that they'll be saying in this morning's review and things like that. Even if the URC, win last season did come ahead of schedule, but there's guys in that team who were there at Sandy Park on Sunday who went to the well last season, went to South Africa and dug out some big, big victories en route to winning the URC. So you'd like to see a few more of them step up. I think it is worth mentioning as well, Will, that they are missing some key guys as well as Peter O'Mahony. RG Snyman and Jean Klein, Edwin Adogbo, they're big losses, figuratively as well as everything else. And I thought Munster lacked a little bit of punch when the going got tough. You look at the lack of impact they got from the bench, compared to what Exeter brought on. A guy like Jack Dunn, who let go by Leinster last year, he came off the bench, obviously scored the try, but had a big, big impact as well, which was nice to see from an Irish point of view, but not so much from a Munster point of view. And the only players that Graham Rowntree looked to bring on before the 70th minute mark, when the shit was hitting the fan, really, were Ollie Yeager, Conor Murray, Josh Wycherley came on. Other than that, he had two teenagers in Ben O'Connor and Brian Gleeson on the bench. A guy like Alex Candellan, another young guy. Rory Scannell didn't get off the bench. So, Munster are a bit skinny in terms of their options at the moment, and I think that came back to haunt them as well, particularly when you look at how Exeter were able to turn the game around.
Yeah, and when I mentioned earlier about maybe trying to look at the positives in some elements, I think maybe I'm just being seduced by some of the sexy rugby that was on show at Sandy Park, because even if Munster were playing Route 1, boring, terrible to watch rugby, it would still be awful to blow these leads against teams that they should be beating from the positions they were in. It's just, I suppose, as you mentioned, when you win a league maybe ahead of schedule, the expectations naturally go up, but at the
I
same
wonder, are
time,
they caught between two stools, Will, a little bit, in that the attack has clearly, it's night and day from what we were seeing under Johan van Graan. And I would say supporters are loving watching Munster at the moment. They're not loving the results, but they're a really good team to watch. But they've maybe gone away from some of the fundamentals that we associate with Munster over the years. Their set pieces really struggled now. That could be down to some individuals that are missing, but you've got to play the hand you're dealt. Their maul defense has been really poor. We were talking to Dennis Leamy last week, and he said that they've tweaked their defensive system a little bit this year. That they're giving certain guys more freedom to go after certain breakdowns and stuff. So that's been a big focus for them. So I wonder, is that taking a little bit of time to bed in as well? But maybe that could be part of the teething problems that they're going to have to go through, because look, if the attack wasn't firing as well as it is, I think Munster, we could be saying, are in trouble here. But the fact that they are playing so well, you would hope that the other things can kind of knit around the attack, because it is going so well.
And just to talk about that last try from Henry Slade, are we all in agreement that should have been ruled out for offside? Like,
Definitely,
yeah,
100%.
Those lazy runners,
They're-
like Slade did well at the time his run, but that doesn't mean, it doesn't erase the fact that there was like three guys walking back in the passing channel. I just thought it was an obvious disallowed try and a penalty to Munster. You're in the corner then, like it would have been maybe pinching it back off Exeter, but it was still a definite disallowed try in my opinion.
Yeah, there was a bit of sloppy stuff, wasn't there? I think from the referee, and like throughout the game, I just felt like there was a good few where I was saying, "Geez, that looks really obvious." And look, across the board, the offside rules. I mean, I just feel like they're letting people. Do you know what? I'm about to go on a bit of a rant here, but I'm going to stop myself because I do think it's so hard to referee rugby. Honestly, I was in the RDS in the weekend. Like it's almost impossible to referee the game now. It's just there's so much going on at every single breakdown and everything. But um, I will say one thing. I think the offside rule. It's interesting we're talking about it now because I just think they're not refereeing it at all well enough. I just think it's so hard to attack well at the moment. The way teams are getting off the line. It's just one thing. I think the linesmen have to be way more active on it and have input and take pressure off the referee. Sorry, I know I'm going. I'm expanding a little bit on the question that you wanted me to answer, but it's been a pet peeve of mine watching games. That and how long it takes to set up a scrum, which I would love to go on a rant on. But I think it was a bad mistake at a critical juncture, and you're right. It would have actually changed the complexion of things very, very much so for Munster at that point. They would have put the pressure on them, and you think might have been able to get something if they've been able to galvanise themselves. But it was disappointing for them to miss it. I think it's definitely an issue, and it should have been picked up, and it should have been a try.
Yeah, I think it was so obviously offside. I thought that you're at least guaranteeing Munster to get that second losing bonus point, and then as I said, a line out in the 22, and who knows what could happen. Keen to change tack slightly. And I know you and Rod had a good back and forth about RG Snyman on the podcast. I listened to it this morning before we went on here, just to gauge the temperature of what you guys were saying. And Rod jokingly said, when you're over at Sandy Park, to ask a few Munster fans or discuss with them because you kind of were coming at it from two different viewpoints. Like, did you get a sense from people over there? Like, was it a big talking point? Were people shocked? Were they angry? What's the sense now with a few days removed from the initial report?
Well, first of all, I didn't do what Rudd's suggestion was, go around my dictaphone on the plane to Bristol and start vox popping the Munster fans. No, but I did. I actually knew a couple of different groups of people who went over as supporters for the match. So I got a chance to catch up with them. And sure, like, that was the big talking point. Of course it was. But my view hasn't changed on it at all, and they were, I have to say, more on my side of things. Obviously, there's disappointment there that Snyman is going to Leinster. Of course there would be, but I think they realised that Munster had the chance to keep him, and they didn't. And look, I don't want to go over the old ground that I did on last week's podcast, because myself and Rudd really did get into it, and we were, I think, pretty much at opposite scales in terms of the argument. I suppose, like, in short, the crux of mine is that Munster weren't able to keep both Jean Klein and RG Snyman due to the fact that Jean Klein is now a South African player and no longer an Irish international. They opted to keep Klein. Rudd was pretty hot on the fact that Munster wouldn't have been able to keep Snyman even if they wanted to. I'm not sure that would have been the case, to be honest, if Jean Klein had stayed an Irish international. I think we can underestimate Munster's ability to find the resources when they need to. I think we've seen that when Damien de Allende came in, when Snyman came in, they have this outside investment, which is still a bit of a mystery. So if Klein hadn't left, I wouldn't have ruled out the possibility of Snyman staying at Munster, particularly because he didn't want to go anywhere either. So there's obvious benefits to Snyman staying in Ireland. Someone said to me recently as well that I think he's not too far off becoming an Irish citizen in terms of getting the passport, which could be another reason why he wants to stay in Ireland. I'm sure there's 500,000 other reasons why he might want to stay in Ireland if the money that's being talking about for Leinster is true. But look, at the end of the day, like, sport is a professional business. I can understand why Munster fans would be, angry if Snyman goes on and has a brilliant Leinster career and helps them win Champions Cups, but he didn't decide to do his ACL back to back. He would have much rather have played a bigger role at Munster. He did play a role in them winning the URC last season. He's a really popular guy. I don't think there'd be any animosity between the players in the dressing room or anything like that. I'd be shocked if, when Snyman is fit, hopefully in March, that he doesn't play a role for Munster again. I think they'd be mad not to use him. And look, it's a big risk for Leinster, but they clearly think it's a risk we're taking, and it's hard to argue with that when you see what he delivered at the World Cup. He's going to be working with a coach who knows how to get the best out of him in Nienarber, and I suppose that's the way the cookie crumbles. But the point I was trying to make last week is it's never a good idea, and you'll know this as well, to judge the reaction of most people off what you see on social media, and in particular Twitter. like it's such an echo chamber, and you have lots of people like shouting loudly and how it's a disgrace and he's a mercenary and all this. But I just don't think that'll be the view of most Munster fans in the cold light of day, and certainly the few who I spoke to in Exeter, that was the sense. That's not to say people aren't angry and disappointed about it, but I think they understand that this is the harsh realities of top level sport.
It's funny just as you say that there because we got a good few messages in about it on Spotify, and one from Carl. Keane is miles off the mark on RG Snyman. We backed him when he was hurt twice. I understand we can't afford him, but does that mean he has to go straight to our biggest rivals? He should be ashamed. Pure mercenary. So that was one of the messages we got in. But to be fair, I think it's the most natural thing in the world that a Munster fan would be like annoyed that he's going to Leinster after just the nature of how his injury hit, kind of tenure there was gone. I think that would be fairly.
But that's fine. It's
Yeah.
fine to be annoyed, and I'm not saying that. And in response to Carl's nice message there, thank you, Carl. I'm not saying that Munster fans aren't annoyed. Of course, they're right to be annoyed, but I don't think it's going to be this grudge that they're going to hold. I mean, it just goes back to my point that Munster opted to keep Jean Klein, and that was the right decision for Munster, you know. So I can understand Munster's frustration and all that. Absolutely, of course, I can. But I think the page will quickly turn on this.
Yeah, Luke, what's your thoughts on the whole thing?
Yeah, look, I think I'd be disappointed if I was from Munster, but I'd probably lean more towards Cian's point of view. I think, you know, moving on from that and that side of things, I think from Leinster's perspective, it's a good signing. I don't think he's as good as everyone says he is. I think I heard some absolute garbage talking about he's the best lock in the world. He's not. He's a good player. I think a little bit looser than maybe like I don't think he's in the same category as Etzebeth, not even close. Um, but he's a good player, and he fits the bill for what I think an international signing should be. If you're going to give up one of your squad players, it should be for a guy who's starting or close to starting in one of the best teams in the world, and he should make your team better if he's picked in it. I haven't always thought that about Leinster's previous or like kind of foreign signings in the last couple of years. I think there's kind of been some fairly like good players, but not great players, and I think he's closer to the great player than a good player in my opinion. So, yeah, I think from a Leinster perspective, it makes sense. I think what may end up the fallout, the one negative fallout possibly I could see from this is that the likes of a Joe McCarthy, who I think has really come on, might not get game time. Now I think they might have made this decision thinking that maybe Joe is still a little bit to go on the journey, and he does have, but I think from what I've seen so far, I'm not sure. I think he might be the perfect fit for Leinster, exactly what Leinster have been missing, So Snyman might, while nice to have, he might not be absolutely necessary for what Leinster need to get them over the line. It might be something like a tight head that maybe suits Leinster more. I think if they're trying to win a couple of European Cups in a row, which is I think what the goal is there. So, yeah, I think from a Leinster perspective, it does make sense, even though I'm a little bit worried about the McCarthy fallout. From Munster's perspective, disappointed. But I think, at the end of the day, once the RFU made the call, and you think about the Klein thing, Klein would fit better with them because he's got a better injury profile and he was brilliant for them last year. He actually was more effective, I thought, than Snyman last year for them. So he's been a big player for them. So I can see why they went that direction with Klein. Even though, there will be a disappointment that they couldn't hang on to Snyman too. But I think they have a lot of guys. Like, I mean, we wouldn't want to see a Dogbu and and a Hearn or these guys who might be stuck for getting into possibly a back row. You wouldn't want to see them not playing at all because you want to see those guys getting some time in the pocket, whereas they won't if Snyman's there because it'll be Klein, Snyman, and it'll be Byrne taking those slots. Where Munster actually look like they're actually quite well. I think they look like they're well stacked in that area now. From a couple of years ago, where you said, not so sure. So this one might make sense for everyone.
Yeah, Keane, the McCarthy piece is a good point. Like, he's really had a good big impact since he's returned from the World Cup. Thought even off the bench against Sale, he had a big impact as well. Obviously, he put himself about a lot against La Rochelle, gave away a couple of penalties and got binned, but was very physical and looks like physically he is kind of getting to that stage where he can match up against some of the biggest kind of locks in the world. Like, sometimes when like Leinster do get overseas signings, I am kind of wondering, like, should any of them be sanctioned in some ways? Like, obviously they'll say they need them, but then I'm also like, they have a lot of good young players. Like, we literally spent half the shows talking about moving this guy there, moving this guy there. Sometimes I'm like, should any of these be sanctioned by the IRFU? If the IRFU ultimately are allowed to say, no, you can't get this guy, like Joe McCarthy, it's better for Joe McCarthy to be playing Championship Cup rugby than RG Snyman from an Irish perspective. Obviously, Leo Cullen would probably love to have Snyman starting big matches like that, but from the overall kind of helicopter view, I could see why they wouldn't get any of these players really because they do have a lot of depth and young guys coming through.
I still though think that the big names have a big role to play, and Luke will know this better than anyone, considering he was in a Leinster dressing room with so many top class overseas signings, Rocky Elmson, Ethan Athewa. Like these guys contribute massively to Irish rugby and the culture. So, I mean, I know Snyman has played, what's he played, 10 games in 4 years since he's been at Leinster, or since he's been at Munster, which is crazy when you put it like that. And just a quick one on Jean Klein. He, of Munster's 26 competitive games last season, Klein started in 24 of them. It's actually ironic that he's injured at the moment because he's just so generally durable. But the younger locks in Munster, the ones that Luke was talking about there, Adogbo, Tom Ahern, Finian Wycherley, these guys would all speak very highly of the role that Snyman has played, even when he's been out injured. It hasn't been a case that, he's been kind of out of sight, out of mind. He actually has been trying to give back as much as possible. So, from Leinster's point of view, I think they would argue that like they've lost last two Champions Cup finals. They've had two trophyless seasons. They've generally had big overseas players have played a role in them winning previous Heineken Cups. You've Alalatoa, who's out the door at the end of the season. He confirmed that last week he's going to Claremont. It'll be interesting to see if Leinster are going to try and directly replace him with another foreign tight head lock, as Luke kind of touched on there. But I wouldn't have too many concerns about a Joe McCarthy, I have to say. I think Joe McCarthy is going to be a massive player for Leinster. I think he's going to be a massive player for Ireland, possibly in even in the upcoming Six Nations. I think it's guys on the next rung on the ladder, maybe a guy like Ross Maloney who's going to get forced out here. The younger guys coming through, Brian Deeney, Conor O'Tiernig, they're the guys who are going to find it hard to get the game time. But then again, you look at what South Africa do and how they've kind of reinvented the bench, and I know Luke doesn't entirely agree with some of their selections that they did at the World Cup, but I mean, is it mad to think that Leinster might spend 500 grand a season on RG Snyman, but they might actually use him off the bench and have Joe McCarthy and James Ryan as their starting locks, and then he comes
Thought
off the
occurred
bench?
to me, but then like why? Like, can you justify spending that much money on someone who, if you're not going to start him, like I know he was really good in that role at the World Cup, but that doesn't make a huge amount of sense either.
No, it doesn't, but it could be one way they'll go that like guys are going to pick up injuries. It is an attritional position. Look, I can see why Leinster would roll the dice on this, to be honest. I think it's taken Munster behind the scenes by surprise because they thought Snyman was off to bat to link back up with Johan van Graan. So you'd imagine Nienarber has kind of come in here late in the day and said, well, why don't we try and get this guy? And look, because he played so well at the World Cup and pretty much showed no ill effects of doing his ACL twice. I mean, he's out at the moment with a chest or a shoulder injury that he picked up in the final. I think probably increased his value even more because he played such a big role, if that makes sense, because he looks like he's flying it after those two bad knee injuries. So, yeah, like I said, I wouldn't have too many concerns for Joe McCarthy. I still think he'll play a hell of amount of rugby. I mean, there's also the chance that Snyman goes to Leinster and his luckless run continues. I mean, 10 games in 4 years for Munster is pretty remarkable, really. So I wouldn't have too many concerns. It's the guys underneath I think will be the ones getting forced out.
I just think it's just set up for Snyman to like not get a single injury in 2 years and play like every single match, and then I can just see then the social media backlash, which would be very unfair for Munster considering how little he got to play for them. Luke, just Leinster generally, obviously you mentioned you're at the RDS, and similar to maybe Munster and Bayonne for a while, like Sale obviously made a maybe changed their entire team, but they were leading. They were up until half time, looked to be in a very good position. Obviously, then Leinster kicked on the more quality side, ended up shining through in the end. But what did you make of the performance generally? Conceding 2 tries at the end as well, and ended up only being a 10-point margin. But how do you assess how they performed?
I thought they were poor for large parts of it, actually. I thought they made a lot of errors. I thought defensively, actually, they got opened up a good few times at the start of the game. and got lucky actually. I thought. Yeah, they rode their luck. But at the end of the day, like at the kind of key junctures, they did show their class. I thought just before half time, I thought even though the bear, like obviously the bear drop before that try while Robbie Henshaw was off the pitch was a kind of pretty frustrating mistake. They did manage the game well during that period when Robbie Henshaw was off the pitch and pretty much spent the whole of the 10 minutes down in sales, 5 meters from their line. Um, but I would question some of the decision making. You know what I mean? They had like played a set play off when they were 5 meters out off the line, and they had a line out 5 meters out. Um, a center off the pitch, and they go off the top 5 meters from the line. I was just kind of like, they just looked like they were a little off the pace. Their thinking wasn't great. They just weren't sharp. I thought they fell off a lot of tackles, and it was really only when they decided to get a grip of the game that they did that, and they muscled up physically. And I thought McCarthy was key. He was kind of forefront of my mind. It's probably why the Snyman thing is. It was one of the first things I mentioned when I talk about Snyman, because I just think McCarthy has been brilliant. But so was Baird. Baird at 6 was excellent. I thought he was high energy. I thought some really good carrying. A few mistakes here and there, but I thought overall, like at 6, I think he's going to push O'Mahony this year quite close for that 6 slot. When I thought at the World Cup, he looked like he maybe had taken a little bit of a backward step. But yeah, I mean, my worry about Leinster and playing at one speed still stands, Will. I think they looked a little frantic at times. I thought that they were at their best during that kind of 20 minutes after half time when they just decided to hang on to the ball, play one-out rugby. They have so many runners like Sheehan, Baird, Doris, these guys. They're bloody hard to stop when they just keep kind of muscling up and just keep showing up around the corner. It's boring. But it's very, very effective, particularly when you look at the bench that Leinster have. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. I thought Frawley wasn't actually great. I thought he had a few kind of messy kicks here and there as well. So, look, it might have been a hangover from the week before. I think that might have taken a lot out of them. I think emotionally they would have built up a lot for that one, but it still wasn't really good enough against a Sale outfit that were pretty game, but we're also given lots of opportunities to get into the game by a sloppy Leinster performance for the most part. So I think it's kind of the perfect coaching point for the Leinster management, isn't it? It's a kind of a cautionary tale. Okay, we've come back from La Rochelle, we've got the win, but hang on a second there, lads. We're not as far along as we think we are, and we were sloppy in the weekend. So I think they're in a really good place. Sounds like a contradictory statement, but they were sloppy in the weekend, and I think it's a really nice way for the coaching staff to tell a good story and say, look, I've got a long way to go here. There was a lot of people thinking that it was job done after the La Rochelle win away. I think Nina Bar has already had the big impact. I thought they looked like there's still things to iron out. Defensively, it looks like he's trying to get them to be even a little bit more aggressive, but they were sloppy and gave lots of openings to a very average Sale team out in the pitch. A good Sale team, but lots of changes from their first team. So there's a lot of road to be walked before they get to the promised land, but they'll be happy with where they are sitting after 2 rounds, absolutely. And I think they'll think job done, but more to do.
Yeah, like results wise, they've won 8 straight. They lost the opening game of the year to Glasgow, and they've won every game they played since then. But Cian, I don't think anyone, like as Luke was saying there, I don't think anyone who's watched the games, I think I've seen all of them. They've been pretty mediocre for large parts of the season. Lots of areas, as Luke touched on, that they can improve on, and it's great that the coaches can maybe do that when you're in a winning situation versus Munster, who've kind of blown 2 games in a row and now have to do it from a much more difficult position. But like, where is your assessment? I asked you, I think it was off air. I'm not projecting any confidence. Do you think they'll win the Champions Cup this year before the tournament? You said you didn't think they would, but now we're halfway through the pool stages. Like, where do you think they sit? Are they still kind of up near the very top echelons, especially with La Rochelle now, much like Munster, having to maybe win their next 2 games to even get out of the group?
Yeah, a bit like Munster, we obviously hold Leinster to certain high standards that they themselves hold them to. And Luke is right, they just didn't hit the same heights. But I would be cutting them a little bit of slack because they went to a dark place in that La Rochelle game the previous week. It was such an absolute slog, I'd say, both mentally and physically. Coming off the back of the World Cup, I think there was always going to be a bit of a a dip last weekend, but probably more so than a lot of people would have expected, purely because Sale sent over such a weakened team. I did enjoy Alex Sanderson firing up his players, a couple of them giving out in social media about people having a pop at them for sending such a weakened team. Look, that's fair enough to create their own siege mentality, but from a tournament point of view, it was really disappointing that they did send over such a changed team, because look at how well the guys who did come over played and how far they pushed Leinster. What it would have happened if they had brought the likes of George Ford, Tuilagi, these guys. So I thought that was
See, can I
disappointing.
say as well, Cian? Because I was asked about this a lot. I don't ever remember on the Leinster teams that I played on, even when we weren't really that good, sending over a weakened team in Europe. And
Mm.
ever, it never even entered the mind to do that. I just think it's so disappointing. I honestly think you should be like dock points or something. There's something. It's ridiculous, I think.
Well,
It's
especially
the
for
full.
sales. Sorry, like when Gloucester did it last year, like Gloucester are mid-table. They were going to get hockeyed either way. Sale are one of the best teams in England. Like they have chock full of international and a
And
real.
they have less games this year, Will, as well, with the
Yeah,
three
exactly. The
teams kind
three
of
less teams.
folding up.
So
Yeah.
I just thought it was bizarre to beat Stade Francais, and they didn't even beat them with a bonus point. So it's not as if they could say, "Oh, we've really got our maximum points from the opening game." So like they need points, and as you said, they played well with the team they brought. They left 10 guys at home who like I just sometimes I can see it, and I don't agree with it, but I can kind of understand a team doing it to a degree. This one I just didn't understand, unless he just thought we're going to lose either way. I'm just going to rest them. Now they play Saracens on Friday night in a big Premiership game at home. That's obviously the focus for him. That's what he decided to do. But I just think it's, as you said, very disappointing. Right? Like I thought.
And Leinster were vulnerable because they were coming off the back of that La Rochelle game, and like I just said there, look how well their second string or third string team, whatever it was, how far they pushed Leinster. Like, what would they have done if they had more of their bigger guys on board? And you were kind of hoping after the opening weekend of the Champions Cup the week before, because the English teams went so well, and it was funny just like reading and listening to the English coverage, the Champions Cup was back in vogue all of a sudden because the English teams were winning. And you know what? I had no problem with that, because I think the Champions Cup is a far better competition when the English teams are all in. You just don't want to be seeing, like you said, Will, one of the best teams in the Premiership sending over such a weekend thing. Like I'd love to be like a fly on the wall in that dressing room, like the big leaders. Like, what did they think that says about the mentality of the club, that they're basically saying, we can't beat Leinster at home, let's focus on the Premiership game, we'll still get out of the pool. And that's what they will argue, that they'll still get out of the pool because of the way the format is. But to me, it's just not a strong mentality. It doesn't create that kind of winning mindset.
Or even have them on the bench, like did not even have like George Ford on the subs bench, because at halftime it was a draw. So it's not as if like Leinster came out and just smoked them from the get go like they did against Gloucester last year when Gloucester sent over their second team. Like if they had some of their big guns in reserve, the game, I think it was only like a try in it until like the hour mark almost. So like there was plenty of time for say George Ford to get on the pitch and start dictating things. They had some clever kicks for the try. Was a really good one. Like he's a very good tactical kicker. It's just as the game unfolded, I wonder like did Alex Sanderson regret his decision, or like I just thought, yeah, I just didn't agree with it at all considering
It
where
felt like
Sale
an
are.
opportunity missed. Will, I agree, and I do think that the coaching staff clearly did some homework too. Like that was a beautiful set play. That was definitely a set move. I thought, unless it was, well, sorry, I'm going to say 90% that was a set play. The little grubber behind for Dupree to go through. From the line, I mean, that was a beautiful bit of play. So, like, they had done the preparation. I thought they defended pretty well for large parts as well. Managed Leinster, they were up in their face. They made it difficult for Leinster to play. Like they were up for it, and I was kind of thinking, like, that was just, it was poor. It felt all wrong to me. It felt like the initial statement I made. I never played in a Leinster team, anywhere in a European competition where we brought over our second string knowingly. Never. I just never did. Now I know our mindset it might be slightly different, but still, just even from a personal pride perspective, like you're going up against, like, you want to even when we were bad teams, even when we weren't really good at Leinster, we sent over our best team to away fixtures because we wanted to get to the top table of Europe, and we knew that we needed to be able to beat those teams, and you have to learn how to do those things away from home. So to not really give them, I don't think, enough resources to go ahead and get the win when they put themselves in a really good position, or Leinster probably helped them a lot too in terms of that and having played so poorly. But regardless, they were in a good position to not have the firepower to go and finish the thing off. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. Now, I would say the scheduling isn't great to have a Friday fixture after it either. I mean, something should be done about that in terms of, the Premiership, because that doesn't really play into, having your most competitive sides out, the 6 days before. That's definitely not helpful as well. That's another wrinkle in this one too.
And ironically, like one of the kind of experienced guys they did bring over, Johnny Hill, gave away a real dumb penalty when he, on top of Van der Fleer. I think there was only a try in it at that stage. So the one guy you did bring over, maybe you're one of the few guys with a bit more experience, a bit of international, kind of quality, ended up having a key moment that kind of sealed Leinster's kind of win in the end because Leinster got such a big lead. Um, Maybe moving on to some of the other games, like Ulster beating Racing Keen. What a major win and what a vital win that was for Ulster. Like, talk about kind of having negativity around a team. Like, it didn't really appear on paper they were primed for a big bonus point win because Racing, sent over their strongest team or close to it. And we were, talking about teams who didn't do that this weekend. It was great to see Racing do it, albeit they ended up getting hosed. So maybe in retrospect, maybe Lancaster would have preferred to send a weakened team. But what did you make of that win and how vital it is for Dan McFarland, who was coming under a lot of pressure?
I think I called this on Friday's podcast, Will, that it was going to be the most on-brand thing for Ulster to deliver a huge performance in Belfast on Saturday night with a French team coming to town. The problem will be what comes next. And look, it was a brilliant win. They were really, really good. They played exactly how we know Ulster can play. And this is why, well, certainly I get really frustrated with Ulster because they so often play within themselves. They've been wildly inconsistent within games and then from game to game. But I just thought this was going to be, a classic Ulster, big performance, big result, and it was like a couple, like when they're big, like it sounds so obvious and it really is, but when their big players play well, everything hums. I thought John Cooney was excellent, but Stuart McCloskey and James Hume played like the centre partnership that had everyone really excited a couple of years ago and showed that this Ulster team are far more than just the Route 1 direct approach, scoring tries from mauls. I loved the creativity they had around the 5 meter taps. Like that was just brilliant to see. Like Leinster are so good at that, and whenever Leinster do it, I'm certainly always singing their praises. So I don't think I've ever seen, I don't know about you guys, have you ever seen the one that John Cooney did when he kicked it up for Nick Timoney off the tap? I don't think I've ever seen that done before. And while it might have been a bit risky, I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, it was clever, and as you said, like it was great to see them finally play the way we know they can. Because like when you look at their team sheet, like there's a lot of quality there. That's why it can be so frustrating when you see them kind of, almost no show in the second half against Bath, and there was in other games this season. Like Luke, what jumped out to you about, how they went about their business?
Well, sorry, great performance, but I'm gonna. We talked about echo chambers earlier on. I feel like it's gonna be the same again. Yeah, it's just that consistency with them. We just don't know what we're going to get next week. I still think, against the musclier packs, they look a little light to me. I think they do rely heavily on like, and they've had some bad luck injury wise. I think most of their key guys are pretty injury prone. You think of Henderson, Addison. You think of Hume has had a few bad injuries too. So they've had a bit of bad luck up there as well. Alongside, Marty Moore's had some bad injuries too. Things like that don't help you. Your tighter props such a key position. So yeah, like there's a bit of that going on up there, which doesn't help with the consistency. But there's something else going on as well, where there is still enough quality on show, enough guys playing consistently who are good professional rugby players to not have these wild swings. So I'm really pleased for them. I think they needed a bit of a lift, but I'm also afraid to give them too much credit because I just don't feel like they're going to back it up again. I just that team is still. They still need some convincing to turn me around and to get me on board again. I've been positive on them before a few times at the start of seasons, and I just got burnt. I keep getting burnt by them whenever I give them praise, so I'm cautious enough about them. And I think, there's still work to be done before they're out of the woods on this. I just would love to see some of those young players really, really kick on. It's annoying me now. I'm actually getting annoyed watching them. Do you know when you're kind of going, like, what's going? Why is this not happening for them? Um, but I'm hoping this is a catalyst for them for the rest of the season because we do need it. Like we need a strong Ulster. Like it's not like Ulster have always been a really strong team in Irish rugby, and I think the Irish team plays well generally when the Ulster team is playing well because they always contribute a few really key guys to the team. I think, and we just haven't seen enough of that from them. So I hope they kick on now.
Just to tie in with that, I fully agree. Like, I hope that this is a statement performance and it proves to be the turning point of their season. But how many times have we been down this road with Ulster in the past? And I think that's what Luke is saying, and I fully agree. Like, as Eddie O'Sullivan would say, I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid just yet.
Yeah, no, I take your point. I suppose it's just that, like, even them, as you said, Keane, on brand to get a big win in Ravenhill, but I even thought that was maybe beyond them. They'd been that kind of inconsistent and
They were
poor
poor.
that I was actually kind of thinking they might lose all their 4 pool matches. So even getting that one win and a few losing bonus points can get you into the next stage. And they play Connacht on Friday night now in an Interpro, and obviously Connacht, another very heavy defeat, Luke, against Saracens, and it's just like been a really disappointing couple of weeks. But again, like I do look at it and like, look, they got hammered by Saracens. That's not a good thing, but the expectations, obviously, for me, the Bordeaux game was the really bad one. Like, going away to Saracens, Connacht versus, like, I'm not really expecting them to get much from that game anyway.
Yeah, but 55 points is
Not saying it's a good day at the office by any means.
you're not
I'm just like,
you will never hear me say conceding 55 points is okay.
but they
Even if
got
you
out with
score
they
even
got
if
a
you
try
score
bonus point out
56,
of it.
I don't
1 point
think
out of that game
I
is actually on paper a good return.
you're technically correct, and I agree with you technically, but it's still wrong. You just
Yeah.
know, like I'm passionate about this. I just feel like loads of people just do not watch the defensive part of the game at all. They're only concerned about how teams look going forward, and
They would have taken a
Connacht,
losing bonus point, Luke, wouldn't they? Instead of a try-scoring bonus point, would have been a more kind of
yeah,
respectable, like,
that's
you know what I
what
mean?
if you're a coach, you've got to think,
Yeah,
okay, my team showed a little bit of heart, a bit of grit. Like that's always what I'd be looking for, and
yeah.
I can build on that. If I have that, I know my team will be competitive. Whereas if I don't have it, I really don't know what I'm getting week to week, and that's kind of what you're seeing from Connacht at the moment. So I Fardo, great guy, but there's work to be done on the defensive side of the ball. And look, he's a young coach, and you do hope that he can get buy-in and get guys to get a little bit stingy, because they just need to be a bit stingier defensively. I love what they do in attack. They've got plenty of quality on show there. We know they'll score tries, but we also know at this point that they're going to concede a lot of tries and more than they're scoring, which is just really not good enough. So, yeah, technically Will is correct, but I don't know, anything over half a century. I just can't. I can't say the words. Will I can't.
Yeah, no, you're
I
right.
can't.
Like, I'm only correct in the merest technical sense that, like, if you had asked them before the game, would you take any bonus point out of this game, they would have said yes, because Saracens were coming off a defeat against the Bulls. They had their full team on fire. Atoje, Funapola brothers, etc., etc. Like, it's
Yeah.
not. I don't think it's realistic to expect Connacht to go there and win or to get close to winning. I don't think, but. Keen, like, what do you make of where they're at generally? Obviously, they started the season with 3 home games in a row. I'm still not sure why that was, but 3, impressive victories. I think they've only won 1 game since then, albeit it was away to the Sharks. It's never easy to win in South Africa. Like, the teams they've lost to, they lost to the Bulls on Loftus Versfeld. A last second try against Leinster. They lost to Saracens. A star-studded Bordeaux team. Now, I'm not saying this any. I'm just trying to give a little context. Like, they've been playing good teams as well. It's not as if they've been losing. Traditionally, they might slip up against the Dragons away or Zebre away. At least it's been the top tier of Europe or European rugby that they've been losing to, albeit they've been trounced in most of those games.
The Leinster one has potential to be a disheartening one, though, Cian. You know what I mean? And actually, by the way, I would also just I wanted to circle back. I think the Munster one could be a little disheartening. You've got to pick yourself up quickly after they're disappointing ones. Ones you throw away really hurt the confidence. Don't know if you have a view on that one.
Yeah, no, definitely. I was down in Galway twice the week of the Bordeaux game. I covered the Bordeaux game, and I went down during the week as well, which is obviously the few days after the Leinster defeat. And look, I mean, the coaches and the players were talking about how it was good that they had a short turnaround, Friday night game, back on the horse and all that. Whereas I think we saw that there was a massive hangover from that Leinster game. They put a lot into it, and to have been beaten in the manner that they did really, really hurt. But look, I take your point, Will, about the caliber of teams that they've played. Like, they did start with 3 wins. I think the reason they had the 3 home games was because, remember, they started last season away from home because the sports ground was being done up. So I think it was to return the favour, possibly. I could be wrong on that, but I think that's what that was about. But I don't think anyone in Connacht was getting ahead of themselves. I know Pete Wilkins was there last year and the handover had started, but you've got John Muldoon coming back in is a new coach. You've got obviously Scott Fardy coming in, and we've seen that that's a major work in progress, because I was having a look at it. They've conceded 173 points in their last 4 games. And I know they've played really good teams, but that's inexcusable at any level. And I think Connacht would say that themselves. And I suppose the thing about it is, it doesn't really get any easier for them. They, like you said, Will, they've got Ulster away on Friday night. Then they're going to have Munster at home. They're away to Leon then in the Champions Cup, which will be a very tricky game, I think, as well. And then they've got Bristol at home, which will be a nice little reunion with plenty of former Connacht guys. You can be sure that they're going to be fired up as well. So they've lost their last 4 games in a row, but the next 4 that they have are really tough as well, and that has the potential, I think, to really derail their season. But Mac Hansen is going to be back this week. That's a big boost. Bundy Aki was far better last week against Saracens than he was against Bordeaux. He was pretty anonymous, actually, which was unlike him in that Bordeaux game. And you can't afford, I touched on Ulster's big players, and when they play well, Connacht need the likes of Bundy and Mack to be firing on all cylinders basically every time they take to the pitch, because they're true world class players. So a
Bundy's the
big,
kind of guy though who'd get better with a few games though, Keane. I think, doesn't he? Like
yeah,
he's going to
definitely,
be,
yeah. And he was
he's a kind of
injured as
big
well.
heavy guy. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And he was so good at the World Cup, so you wouldn't
World
have
Cup,
any
yeah.
fears about that. But it's just that when he is, because he's not going to play a huge amount of games, you'd imagine for Connacht, he'll probably be a bit like Johnny Sexton was at the end of his Leinster career. He'll be playing more for Ireland perhaps than he might for Connacht. But every time he takes to the pitch, Connacht just need to get as much as they can out of him. So it's a big few weeks coming up for them, Will, because like I said, they're coming off the back of 4 straight defeats after what was a positive start to the season.
Yeah, to be fair, like it was always like an outrageously daunting fixture list with a trip to South Africa, Saracens away, like Bordeaux at home was the only one that you thought, oh, okay, at least have a good opportunity, maybe picking up victory. That ended up being an absolute hammering at home. So yeah, it's a very difficult. And even on Saturday against Saracens, they were 17-8 ahead, I think, with 35 minutes on the clock. So again, it's not as if Saracens came out of the gate and were kicking arse from the start. Like, the Saracens were really struggling for a long period, and yet they still ended up, breaking the 50-point barrier, which would be very disappointing. Some other news just before we finish up. Obviously, Andy Farrell's new contract was announced, Luke, late last week, going up to the World Cup in Australia. No real surprise there. Are you happy it's been done and dusted nice and early, or what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, I am. I think it's very pleasing that he's decided to sign up. I think, this suits both parties. I think if you think about what kind of guy he is, I think Ireland is the perfect job for him. I've been saying that since he kind of got in. I just think, even Lancaster as well. They're both kind of good personalities to fit like an Irish mold. Both excellent coaches. Farrell, has been brilliant. I think he's achieved some great things so far. Obviously, a disappointing end to the World Cup, but there was lots to be very proud about in that performance too. And I think where he's brought the team in terms of performance, style of play, I really think he's brought the country on, and I'd love to see. I'm looking forward to seeing the impact he has during the cycle. I want to see if he can bring on a few young players too. That's going to be a bit of a challenge and a key thing. I think if the team are going to, go beyond this quarterfinal stage, love to see maybe a Grand Slam or two again over the tenure. And I'd actually love for him to get that Lions head coaching gig. I know because I think that's a really good opportunity for some of the other Irish coaches to take the hot seat for the year, and we can really develop someone else. I think this might be could be a brilliant cycle for us. I know people are worried about, taking your foot off the pedal to a certain extent in international rugby, but for the Lions, I think personally it'd be great for him to do it. But from our perspective, we get to see some of our guys who we've been in the system for a while. I think take the reins, and we'll learn a lot about them. So I like this. I like the shape of things as we start out on the next 4-year cycle. I think he's the right guy to lead us forward, and I think this will work for him too. I mean, the Irish job is a really great job. I think it's a small country to travel around. I think the teams are very successful. The setup, you have a lot of power and a lot of control over who plays when and where they play, etc. So I'm thinking it's a great fit for him. And Dublin's a great town as well. Seems to enjoy all that. So yeah, I think this one works for everyone. Well, and I'm really pleased on a personal from a personal point of view. I think he's the right guy to lead us forward.
Yeah, I'm thinking to the Lions tour in 2025. Him as the head coach, Paul O'Connell forwards coach, Ron Lagar backs coach maybe, or maybe Paul O'Connell takes the Ireland job for the year, or that could be Simon Eastery. There's lots of
I
movement.
think Paulie for the Irish job would be great. No, I think that one would really work well. Or even Easterby. Easterby's he's been there a long time. Like he is a
10
brilliant
years,
coach.
Yeah.
You know, he's a really good guy too. So he might be a candidate for that role too.
And I think it makes sense for Andy Farrell to sign up for another cycle. Like, you presume at some stage he might go back and coach the English team. Obviously, he played for England. He is English. It makes sense. He's a great coach. But it makes sense for him to do it when Owen Farrell's career is done,
Yeah.
I think. I don't think and obviously he stepped away at the moment. We all know that. But I don't think he wants to be the guy who has to make that transition or that manage that period. I don't think that would be a comfortable thing for either of them. So maybe it makes sense for another 4 years in Ireland and then potentially then to go back to England.
The key from an Irish rugby perspective is actually his other son, his youngest one, that he stays in the country long enough to play for Ireland, because I mean, everything you're hearing, I know he's only a kid, but like everything you're hearing about this guy, he's probably like 12, 13, and not to get too carried away, but he's supposed to be ridiculously good. I mean, it's hardly a surprise when you've got the genes that he does. So I mean, if you're talking Andy Farrell to potentially leave after the next World Cup, he'd be late teens. He'd kind of be on that kind of periphery.
Yeah.
You want him to be here playing for Ireland. That's all I'm saying.
That would be such a funny family
Love it, Cian.
situation.
There we
wouldn't
go.
it?
The
It's like
recruitment is already underway.
yeah, God, plenty of that'll be an interesting one to watch. Just before you finish up, guys, one other thing from that David Nussbaur briefing that I wanted to ask you about is he mentioned that there's an option for the sevens team to call up one player per team. Cian, I'm not sure if you know what kind of players are in the pipeline here. Like, there's a couple of obvious people who've literally played sevens and will be on the fringes of teams, but I'm thinking more like someone like Hugo Keenan being called up, and does he potentially then miss? Luke's already not it.
Don't even say it. Don't even say that name. He's like our best player at the moment.
To be
Why
fair-
would he play sevens?
To be fair, Hugo Keenan, I heard him. He was quoted saying it's not something on his radar. He wants to win a.
We asked him in France. Yeah, we asked him just at a run of the mill press conference in France. Now, to be fair, Hugo doesn't tend to say anything out of line. He's a really safe pair of hands, and he was never going to say, "Oh, I'd love to play for Ireland at the Olympics." But in terms of what players, like I wasn't at the David Nussbaur briefing, so I was only reading the quotes, like you guys as well. He said that it was guys who played sevens. I mean, there's plenty of guys in the provinces who have, like, I'm thinking of a guy like Cormac Izachuku in Ulster who came through.
Or Andrew Smith or someone like that in Connacht.
Yeah, like they're the kind of guys who I'd be thinking. I would be stunned if you're talking about Hugo Keenan, Shane Daly, like these kind of guys who are really important players to their provinces and to Ireland as well in Hugo Keenan's case. Like clearly it's a message that the IRFU are trying to get out there, because James Topping, the men's sevens coach, came out a few weeks before David Nussbaur and said that he would be very open to having guys from the provinces come into the setup. And I have to say, I'm a little bit surprised. I understand it from, you want to have the best players, as many of the best players as possible in there, but that men's seven squad, and actually the same applies to the women's squad. I know they're not looking at getting provincial players. They have their own way of doing things. They kind of come in and out. But that's
don't open up that can of worms.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but my point is that the seven squads are actually very settled, particularly the men's. Like these guys have, like, the amount of work that they put in for very little, it has to be said. And like guys like Billy Dardis, who's been there, for the last however many years, and they're very rarely in the limelight. And then you've other guys, less heralded guys who didn't quite make it in 15s. And we probably had this conversation around, when Anton Dupont announced that he was going to go, how would you feel if you were a French guy? Well, how would you feel if you were an Irish guy traveling the world for the last few years, trying to make it to the Olympics, and all of a sudden you're told that, I don't know, let's say it's an Izachuku or an Andrew Smith is going to be taking your place at Paris next year. Like, because they seem like such a tight-knit group, and maybe I'm over-egging this a little bit, but I would say that has a risk of kind of upsetting team morale and things like that. So I don't think it's going to be a foregone conclusion that we're going to see someone from the provinces. Clearly it's an option, but I think they would have to come in and shoot the lights out in a very short period of time to get ahead of some of the guys who've kind of been there, done that, and in my mind have earned the shot to become Olympians. Like, this has been their goal for the last few years, and an unbelievable achievement to have made it to Tokyo a couple of years ago. It's going to be the first time ever that Ireland are going to have men's and women's teams at the sevens. This is their gig. They deserve the opportunity to go and represent their country. That would
A
be my
different
take.
game, Keen, isn't it? Like, I
It,
think it's a very different game. Like, it's very hard to make a quick transition back and forth between the two. And I can't think of any player who's really gone and been the best, the best 15s player to the best sevens player. I
how
don't
do you
think
think
that really
Dupont
happens.
will do, Luke? Do you think he'll, because he's so
I don't
freakish?
know. I don't think he'll be. I think you've got to be a real runner for it, and he is. Like, he's so good in the 15s game, so strong, squat. Like, he's quick. His skills will definitely hold up, but he will. I don't think he'll be as good as people think he'll be. You're playing against like serious athletes there who are unbelievably fit. You'd expect him to be those things, but I don't think he's got the running for it. Personal. That's only a personal opinion now. He's strong enough for it. He's got the skills for it, but you've got to have. They're all nearly the same kind of size. They're kind of between 5'11" to kind of 6'4". They're all got that kind of lopey stride, really really quick, or else they're super quick. And I don't think he's got that. So I don't know. We watch because everyone had the reason I say it is because he's such a specialist size for rugby. In that 9 position, it's kind of rare enough that you see, unless it's a real speedster, someone that kind of small player, because they all have to kind of play 7. They all have to do a bit of rucking. That's just how that game works. You know what I mean? You have to be able to do all the skills. I don't think that transfer will be as easy as they think it is.
Well, it'll certainly be something interesting to watch over the next few months if any 15s players do get called up and if they can even make an impact. But for now, I'd like to thank Cian and Luke for joining me. And that's actually our last Left Wing podcast of the year. Thank you to everyone who listened throughout the year and the Rugby World Cup. We will be back the first Tuesday of the new year. I believe it's January 2nd with the podcast, looking back on all the rugby over the festive period. In the meantime, you can subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or listen on independent.ie. So, happy Christmas and have a great new year from everyone at the Left Wing. Goodbye.